I grew up in the Ramapo Hills of New York State. In addition to lovely views, the hills offered up wild spaces to explore and countless trails for hiking. One day, my brother came back from a hike, cradling an orphaned baby raccoon, small and helpless and squirming in his arms. My brother and sister and I closed ranks around the little creature, declaring him ours and setting about to make it so. We fed him, rocked him, sang him little lullabies. We named him Ichabod, and that was that. My parents didn't stand a chance. They had a pet raccoon, whether they liked it or not. Ichabod was adorable. He followed us around, bonded with our dog, Dexter, and, like Dexter, learned to avoid the cat. At the time, my family owned a piece of property several miles from town. It was small, 5 acres, but to us kids, it was a vast wilderness. And it had everything: a brook with a swimming hole, woods, a field of wildflowers. On weekends, we would pack a picnic and head out to the property, where we did all the fun things kids would do when they find themselves in paradise. Dexter and Ichabod were no exception. They ran around in a frenzy, splashed about in the brook, napped in the sun. As Ichabod came into maturity, his antics around the house shifted from cute to annoying, at least to our parents. He would claw his way up the curtains or climb into a bowl of pudding left sitting on the counter. One evening, my father blew a fuse. He grabbed his keys and declared that Ichabod was about to take a one-way trip to our property. My brother went along, clutching his pet and weeping. Abandoning a pet raccoon is no easy task. My father and brother mapped a circuitous route into the woods, took off Ichabod's collar, and left him there. My father then led my brother back through the woods on an even more circuitous route, cutting back and forth through woods and field. My brother was heartbroken. When they got to the car, lo and behold, there was Ichabod, sitting on the hood, waiting. Even my father had to admit, we still had a pet raccoon. Fast forward a couple of years. My parents had built a house on the property, and we were now living in paradise. Ichabod, whose favorite snack up until that time had been Cheerios, found a new treat: freshwater mussels from the brookside. Slowly, Ichabod took notice of the wild raccoons chirping and calling in the night from the sycamore trees across the water. He became curious, then restless, and finally, one night, he scratched and whimpered at the door. It was time to make new friends. My brother knew what was coming. Off came the collar one more time. Out went the raccoon, off into the woods. For a time, we were still Ichabod's home base. He came by for visits and spent time with us in the house. He and Dexter were still pals. Cheerios were still on the menu. But the visits tapered off until finally they stopped. Months later, my brother and I were home alone when there came a tapping at the door. Once it was opened, Ichabod came charging past us, ran to my brother's bedroom, and hid under the bed. He slowly emerged, holding out a front paw gripped by a freshwater mussel. My brother, future veterinarian, gathered Ichabod up, took him to the workbench, and performed careful surgery with a screwdriver. Ichabod was free. And he was back. He stayed with us while his paw healed, playing with Dexter and gorging on Cheerios. It was a happy reunion, but all too soon, off he scampered into the woods. We never saw him again. Ichabod was a model of loyalty and trust and autonomy. When you think about it, he was a very assertive raccoon. Whether he was planted on our car hood, scratching to be let out, or months later, tapping to be let back in, he knew where to go and how to ask for help. Ichabod knew instinctively that there is a time for staying and a time for going. When his tribe showed up, he found and claimed his place in the world. Although we didn't realize it at the time, Ichabod was teaching us that the discovery of our true selves would set us free. Centering ourselves, we thought the lesson was about letting go, but really, it was about leaving.
Thank you, Barbara. I love these stories, these surprising stories of how we can relate and be in relationship with animals and our broader environment, which leads to kind of an overarching question of how do we understand our interdependence, both with one another as human beings and within our own species, but also with our planet, the environment that we are a part of, other species, other beings that live on this planet. What does interdependence mean on a deeper level? Now, I grew up knowing very little, having very little firsthand experience with animals and pets. I lived in a household where my dad believed that animals are meant to be wild and they live out in their own environments with their own species, and so they don't belong in the house. And so we had a pet-free house for most of my childhood. But it led to this longing of wanting to have that type of more intimate connection and kind of relationship, day-to-day relationship with an animal. Well, the first chance of living away from our family of origin is typically undergraduate years, and I did not waste time. It was my sophomore year at Georgetown University. I was 19 years old and living in a group apartment, and I decided to go get a parrot. Now, there are different kinds of parrots, and I know nothing about parrots, by the way, because I knew nothing about pets and having animals as pets, so I knew nothing about a parrot. Well, there are three major kinds. There's the macaws, which are the biggest parrots. There are parakeets, which are the smallest parrots typically, and then the middle-sized parrots are called conures. I have a slide for you of what a conure looks like. They're about this big, and that one's a sun conure. That's not the one I had, but it's what they look like. And my Barney, named after Barney Rubble, he was a sun conure like that, the one you're looking at, with a little bit more orange and red on his chest. And I went and got a sun conure without telling my apartment mates and brought him back. And in the process, began my on-the-job learning and training of what it meant to become an adult with a parrot as a pet. Now, my only reference points were the things we kind of hear as kids. You hear the phrase bird brain, so you think that birds are not terribly smart. They have small little heads and even smaller brains, but they're pretty, and they make cute little sounds, and they sit in a cage, and then you feed them, and then you clean the cage. How hard could that be? Anybody could do that, right? I knew nothing about the social life or social needs of parrots, which are immense, by the way. You're supposed to, I learned, after Barney was already a part of my life, get parrots typically in pairs. The reason for this is that they bond for life, typically with their reproductive mate, but not only that, a bit more rare, but they can also bond with like a best friend for life. And when they don't have another parrot of their species to bond with in that way, they'll bond with their primary caretaker, their human. Now, the challenge with this is parrots live in flocks, and within those flocks, they've got these bonded lifetime mates or best friends, and I'm now it for Barney. And when they're in the wild, they don't go very far away from their bonded best friend or mate. Typically, they're in the same tree, if not the same branch, physically close to one another. When they do fly apart, they never fly out of visual distance. And that's some great distance because parrots have keen eyesight, but they can see their best friend or mate, and if they can't see their best friend or mate, they panic and they screech. I had no idea how loud a little bird like that size can screech. Through the entire quad that I lived on, the entire quad, you could hear Barney screeching when I did all the normal things an undergraduate would do, which is go to class, try to do homework, go to the library to borrow books, go to the cafeteria to go eat. Quack, quack, quack. There's the screeching through not just the one dorm building, the entire area. My sole preoccupation became, how do I not get kicked out of campus housing? Well, this was an intense time for me emotionally, probably part of the reason why I felt this inner impulse to get a pet. I felt deeply lonely and confused. I was not yet out of the closet as a gay man, and this was close to that time when I was definitely headed in that direction. But I was wrestling profoundly with the inner confusion around how do I come out as a gay man when I was raised in this extremely conservative and traditional Hindu family. And I had a lot of late nights where I would get weepy and confused and even cry myself to sleep. Now, these late nights when I was feeling these things most intensely, when I was not focused on my schoolwork, they also happened to be the time when I could focus on Barney a bit more concertedly. And conures can be outside their cage, they'll hop around, sit on your shoulder, and he would often be hopping around, sitting around with me, which I appreciated in my loneliness. But on one of these late nights, I was particularly weepy and making my way quickly through an entire box of Kleenex as I wiped my eyes and blew my nose. And I noticed suddenly, Barney starts attacking the Kleenex. And I'm confused, like, what the heck is going on? What is he doing? And I kept watching, and I figured out that he knew that I was distressed, emotionally distressed. He thought the tissue was the cause of my distress, and he was trying to murder it. Because if he could kill the cause of my distress, then I would be happy again. I was so deeply touched. I didn't even know that birds have feelings. Seriously, I had no idea that birds have feelings. So I'm first blown away that, like, he loves me, like he cares about me. And he cares about me and loves me enough that he'd want to attack something to protect me and help me be okay. It was deeply moving, in the midst of that sense of isolation and loneliness I was feeling. And I learned a lot about birds, that they are more complex, more nuanced animals. While I could not see readily or easily a bird's feelings the way I could maybe a dog or a cat, that didn't mean the bird didn't have a wide and deep range of feelings. This led to more, over time, reflection on my part on the nature of flocking. These are animals that live in flocks and bonded pairs within the flocks. And, they take care of each other. No individual is really left alone in those flocks, and certainly not to suffer. And we humans can be so indifferent to one another's pain sometimes, can't we? We have so many examples of that in our society today. How might we flock more deeply and well together as people, as human beings? But even beyond that, how can we flock in a more harmonious, caring way with all the species that inhabit this planet that have complex lives that we don't always understand? I invite you to hold that possibility, maybe even commitment, as I seek to do so in my own life.